Hi, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Kerby Method Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Alice Kerby. I am very fortunate today to have with me Whitney Benjamin. Whitney is a healing artist and a movement teacher. She is the founder of Play Every Day, and she works with somatic athletics. And so we're going to dive in and talk to her a little bit more about what that means. Um, Whitney identifies as an empath, an intuitive healer. She's a mother, a wife, daughter, sister, and friend. At a very young age, she began experiencing pain in her own body due to reading and intuiting needs and emotions of her family and friends. She grew up playing competitive softball. She played and won a national championship at UCLA, and she played professionally in Italy. After leaving college, Whitney worked in the wellness industry, from roles at Lululemon to the CPG world in marketing and product development. Back in 2019, she identified discomfort being caused by emotions and psychic abilities and was dealing with anxiety and depression. At that time, she started working with a somatic experiencing therapist and has moved forward ever since. Whitney divides her time between being a mom and working with female student athletes with a mission to develop the psycho-physical intelligence of young female athletes. She also works with tarot and hosts medicine ceremonies for loved ones. And I love this line. You say, Whitney, I'm a healing artist who has had to work hard to anchor my psychic abilities and utilize physical and emotional pain as a map to well being and spiritual awakening. I feel like
Mhm.
that one sentence really says a lot. So, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I was saying this before we started recording. I love how many things you do and how you've really pulled so many things in together. And I really love that you talk about having psychic abilities and how that's been for you. So I mean, maybe we can start there too, is when you talk about working with your own psychic energies and abilities, what does that mean for you?
It's a really great question. So it's something I've had to really, it wasn't always available consciously to me. I knew I would get these downloads from people and I would just have this like sense of knowing from someone without ever meeting them. Or a lot of intuition, I think, is based on data. Like we are pulling in millions and millions of like reading facial structure and stuff like that. And so for a long time, I had a pretty, wonderful childhood and also like moments that were really difficult. There was a lot of death in my family. I like to think of myself almost like a death doula. Like I've sat with loved ones and grandmothers and godmothers and held them through kind of the death portal. And I think that it reveals, it kind of pulls back the veil of these worlds that we're in. And so I would say in the last like 6 or 7 years I really realized like, oh, this is beyond just like I have pain in my body and I'm experiencing anxiety. Like I'm actually getting downloads from people and I can actually like sense their thoughts and intuit their feelings and know what has happened to them without ever knowing it. And so I've had to really learn how to ground that and anchor that, and also know like what belongs to me and what doesn't, because I would just absorb everything kind of based on my childhood and kind of how we grow up. But yeah, it's been a very interesting process of getting to know myself. And also, like, I think initially I tried to just block out those abilities, and that's where all the pain really came from. And so being able to like have a download or filter it through. And I've learned how to build like a pretty big force field. I know it sounds pretty intense, but yeah, it's been an interesting path of getting to know myself and getting to know kind of my abilities, and how to bring that into the world in a way that's not scary for people, and also gives people the privacy of their thoughts and emotions. But yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And I mean, I feel like we just don't talk about this a lot, right? In society. And so I could see that being really confusing. And yeah, just even as an empath, sometimes I don't think we really give the proper um like the proper accolade or focus to like, hey, this is actually happening and it's real. It's not something that you're too sensitive or you're making things up. And so I love that you just address it so openly. Yeah, I think I'm working with that kind of personally too, with trying to bring my work to the world and being very professional, but also like, yeah, this stuff is real and it happens for all of us or for a lot of us, on some level of can we, how can we come in and ground and work with those force fields and continue to do healing work in the world with knowing our boundaries and having differentiation. Yeah, it's
Yeah, someone like Carolyn Miss has been really helpful for me. I don't know if you've read her book, but Anatomy of the Spirit. I know she has lots of other books and
mm-hmm.
courses, but I read her book, Anatomy of the Spirit, years and years ago. And just the way she would talk about working with clients and just saying like, hey, this is something I'm seeing in you. Like you can take it with a grain of salt. And I think that's what I've learned in kind of intuiting from people is I'm not always 100% right, but I'm always picking up on some sort of energy. So if I'm in a place of like, my vibration is low, my vibration is dark, I'll also pick that up in someone else. And so I will just often, I don't tell someone what I see for them unless they ask me, or I ask for permission to give them like a read. And usually I'll just say, like, take this or leave this, but this is what I'm seeing, or this is what I'm feeling, or I'm intuiting. And then it gives that person almost sovereignty over that, if that makes sense. And they can take it or leave it. But yeah, it really is a vibration that you pick up on. And it's also cues, it's facial cues. It's someone moving, if they're ticking, it's all kinds of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
and I do believe everyone has this ability. Some of us have just had to like probably use it for our own safety to know, if you grew up with, people in your family that maybe had any type of like mood disorders or whatever, like it's a trauma response to be
Yeah.
able to intuit what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps
Yeah.
keep you alive. And I love what you were just talking about, like in the somatic experiencing world, which you probably know, like we'll talk about picking up things in the resonance. And it's been a really interesting part of my own development as a practitioner where I really trust that now. And it isn't right 100% of the time, but it's right a lot. Where if I'm not sure where to go with someone or I'm feeling or if we're just in conversation or in a session, I really will tune in and I have to stay tuned in the whole time anyway with that work, but just notice, oh, this is what's happening for me and then bring it up to them like, hey, I'm noticing this in my own, resonance. Is this true for you? And um, yeah, it's just really fun to talk about. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think
Yeah.
it's overlooked in a lot of ways, and it's because it's not something we can specifically measure. But there, if you just look at the nervous system and the way in which like we are communicating with other people without ever speaking, like, so as you know, so much of dialogue happens without actual words. So
Hmm.
why wouldn't there also be that energetic exchange as well?
Yeah.
And just claiming that it's like, I don't know what this is for you, but this is what I'm seeing. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
This is what's.
tell me I'm wrong. Like like claim it as your truth or not.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting path.
Yeah. And I like how you talked about it gives them sovereignty over it, which is so hugely important. Just to be like, yeah, this is your body and your feelings, and you're empowered to experience them and communicate them to me. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, when you talk about, and I want to hear more about the work you do. Definitely, when you talk about somatic athletic education, it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing with these young female athletes is some form or many forms of nervous system regulation.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could just share a little bit more about like merging that with athletics. Like, how do we work with nervous system regulation, in the middle of a game or in preparation for a game?
My pleasure. Yeah. So I kind of I'll try to keep this long story long shorter. But I had a very interesting recruiting journey, making it to UCLA. I had initially been recruited by Northwestern, and that was like my dream school. I wanted to go to journalism. And when I was on my recruit trip, two of their pitchers went down, and I was an infielder, and so they had to give my scholarship to someone else. And I come from a very like modest working family, so there just was no way I could actually go to Northwestern. And at the time, there was a lot of death in my family, and a lot of my uncle had a nervous breakdown. Like there just was a lot happening. So I kind of was in. I would say, in collapse, to kind of use like a term from your world. And I really wasn't ever able to get out of that. Even though I made my way to UCLA, I walked on, which means I didn't get a scholarship, but I did in the later years, I earned one. But I always identified as that young 18-year-old that like got rejected by Northwestern. And later on in life, I started practicing yoga. I became a personal trainer. I started learning, I just could not stop learning about the body. And when I was 19 at UCLA, like I had so much inflammation, and I think it was because I was just like holding on for dear life, and I couldn't emotionally process the intensity of being at a school that always competed for a national championship, and also like not identifying with the fact that I should be there. I just was like brutally putting my nervous system and my emotions like in a place where they just couldn't win. And so years ago, I met this woman named Jen Richardson. She's local here in San Diego, and she's a yoga teacher, movement teacher. And she taught me a lot about like the David Weck method, about like coiling the core and doing these different things. And we together developed a methodology called mixed yoga arts that she's still doing and running with and working with that in the world. And we created it with like the idea of bilateral patterning. So you're moving left, right. And as you do that, you're tripping almost on your own DMT. And we started working with athletes at USD, and we would teach them these very simple movement patterns, like the teacups exercise, where you just are like following your hand and not trying to spill your tea. And we would have these college athletes like speak about their experience. And one kid had a career-ending injury and was doing the teacups, and he got like physically stuck. And it was a huge light bulb moment for me that if we added movement to this type of like nervous system regulation, especially for athletes, like that's the way through to them, because they'll sit down and they'll have a conversation, but like they're really good about being in their bodies and moving. And so what I do with athletic somatics, which is kind of like my methodology of teaching, I really want to continue to work with female athletes in particular, but I do a combination of bilateral patterning and breath work and just attunement, so they understand moments of their nervous system. But we kind of cycle through, like we start with kind of grounding in and intending like feet up, and then we get into like bigger athletic movement patterns and shorter mobility, and then at the end we do some sort of discharge, or we scream or we yell or we use our vocal tones. So like they're just using their body in a different way, but the whole thing goes through like a movement exercise, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's been really wonderful just to teach girls like very, very simple things, like when someone is, going to a game, or if they're like getting in the batter's box and they're about to hit, they'll do this big breath where they go and they exhale, and it's charging, and that up regulates them. And so just teaching them like a breath where they're going really slow inhale, like slow exhale through a straw, it changes their regulation at the plate. And so it's just stuff like that. And then also teaching them ways of sitting with, failure and processing it and holding themselves through it, and having vocal tones and touch and like safety regulation. It's been really powerful. And a lot of my girls are not only like becoming more athletic, which is wonderful, but you can just see their presence changing in the way that they walk on in the field, in the world. So it's been really, really rewarding, and something I really want to continue to share. But I hope that answers it.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a huge gift. I feel like you're bringing to the world of like young female athletes. Because I was never a college athlete, and it's my nephew was a college athlete for a while, and it just what I know of it, I've worked with some college athletes as a PT, certainly not exclusively, but it seems really intense. It seems like there's almost like just a ton of nervous system override that needs to go on to compete, and professional athletics, too, I'm sure, where you need to compete at this high level, and you've got to like pick yourself up and keep going. And I guess and maybe this is just a tag along to the previous question, how does this, having these young women who are like more embodied and showing up and are able to listen to themselves more, like how does that work with sort of the larger message of override?
um Sovereignty. It brings them back to sovereignty, because I think there's so much to say about this, and I don't want to go on a whole tangent about student athletes, but specifically collegiate athletes, like they're a commodity. Like there's really no other way around it. Especially if you're at a big school, like you are there because you are there to perform. And so even though the best coaches, the most loving coaches in the world will say like first comes school, then comes, softball, volleyball, whatever, then comes family or whatever. That order is never actually true. It's like at all costs, like get on the field. So it's a lot of times what I'll see with girls is they'll have an injury and they'll go into the training room and and we do this just as adults as well. It's like something's happening in our female like reproductive system. We go into the doctor and we're like, what do I do? And with this work where I'm bringing them into their bodies and having them into it and understand the difference between like physical injury pain and actual pain that potentially is emotional and stored pain, it gives them like a little more sovereignty and a little more self-assurance to be able to have dialogue not only with their trainers but also their coaches. And I'm just trying to get them to really vocalize more and see themselves more as like a whole system and a whole person as opposed to just an athlete. That's a lot of the dialogues we have in community when I do like workshops with teams and workshops with bigger groups. Like a lot of the dialogue is around like identity outside of being an athlete and like you are human first and foremost, and let's get you into your body so that you understand it. And we also do like cycle mapping in terms of like how to train with your cycle, because there's points in your cycle where it's better to be sprinting and doing all these intense activities when you're ovulating. And a lot of injuries happen when someone is on her menstrual cycle. Like a lot of knee injuries, like torn meniscus, ACL injuries happen during that time. So just giving that girl the sovereignty over that knowing, even though they may not be able, if they have a game on the day that they're on their menses, that just is what it is. But I invite them into like more recovery and more like, self-care in those moments. So it's really just giving them a map to their own body that hopefully they can take and run with.
Yeah, that's so wonderful that you bring in the cycle mapping as well. It's so important. And it's almost difficult to believe, well, also it isn't that we've never or that's just now sort of becoming more something that we're bringing into the common language.
Yeah, the US women's soccer team did it the last time they won the World Cup, not this last one go around. I'm not sure if their trainer is still with them, but they actually trained like on a cycle schedule and they were more athletic, more dynamic. And I think it's just like it's beyond the physical what your cycle can give to you. It's power.
Yeah.
And part of my hypothesis is that if I can teach a female athlete how to be in her body, she'll also influence the culture, because that's where I learned really everything. Like the first time I had a boyfriend, like my teammates, told me like, this is what you can expect. It wasn't someone at school. It wasn't a teacher. And it was like when I got my period, it was a teammate that like told me like what to expect and what to do. So I kind of just, they're already happening in a community. They create this little bubble of, a community. And so I feel like if I can just infiltrate that with a few girls that have a little more knowing about themselves, it'll kind of ripple out.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's wonderful work. Yeah.
It's really rewarding, and it's very also healing for my own journey of like what I went through as an athlete. Because if I had this methodology and this knowing of myself and this deeper connection to actual athletic movements, like my career would have been really different. And I don't have any regrets over that. Like I said, like pain has really been my map to my well-being, but I definitely want to share this with more young women. And I love working with the female athlete population.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad that you are. Have you found that you get pushback from more traditional coaches in this work at all?
I wouldn't say pushback. I would say the barrier to entry is sometimes like the female coaches get it. Like if I have a dialogue with a female coach, she immediately gets it. But what's happening now in the culture, specifically in softball, which is where a lot of my work comes from, softball is the third highest grossing sport for like ESPN and major TV networks. It goes men's football, men's basketball, women's softball. And so from that, like a lot of them have also come into the coaching of the sport because there's just more money in the sport. But if I have a dialogue with a female and say like, this is what I teach them, this is why I teach them, And not to say men don't get it, I'm just saying like women get it a lot faster. And a lot of times, you know, I see 12-year-olds doing CrossFit workouts, and they're, you know, doing kettlebell swings and their knees are buckling out, and they, you know, they're little baby giraffes. And so I'll go in and work with teams, and I'll just have like, hey, like, let me just do a free workout. Let me just show you my methodology for 45 minutes. If you love it, great. We'll book some sort of like session on that out. And that's usually what happens is I'll do a complimentary workout. And because my girls seem to get not only like stronger physically, but also mentally, that I just keep getting callbacks. And I think the time is actually right for this movement of having more like emotional sovereignty and really mastery of emotions and nervous system. Like a few years ago, it might not have been, but there's been so much dialogue in the sports world, and also a lot of, unfortunately, like suicide and mental health breakdowns, specifically in collegiate sports, that I think it's like the time is right for this. But yeah, really no pushback, just like a little bit of like, there's a barrier to entry of like education of like, what do you mean you're working with the nervous system? Like, that's not something that is in a coach's dialogue. But if I say like, I'm going to help this girl recover from failure, and then she's going to have more presence at the plate, they'll be like, okay, I get that. But they definitely want to like see a stronger body. Like that still wins the day.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense in the world of competitive athletics.
Yeah.
What was it like for you playing professional softball in Italy? How was that experience?
Oh, that experience changed my life forever, and in the best way. Because playing, like you were saying, your nephew played college sports, and it's intense. It really is. There's, if you go to I mean, if you go to any program and play, like that really is your full-time job. You don't, you're a student, you're an athlete. And so I didn't have like the typical college experience where I was going to parties and traveling the world or taking semesters abroad. And so I, right after I left UCLA, I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to like figure out how to, I don't know, be a lawyer. It just felt like the path. And my godmother died. And then that was like my senior year, my junior year. And then almost a year later to the day, her son died. And I was working at a law firm, and I just had this moment of like, there has to be more than this life. This is wild. And I got an email like within that moment that was like, hey, like, we know you played softball at UCLA. We have a team in Parma, Italy. Like, would you be interested in coming and playing for the next 6 months? And I was like, absolutely. It was like,
Here I go.
I didn't consult my boyfriend, now husband. I didn't consult anyone. I just was like, I am leaving this law firm and I am going. And I had a really transformative experience. Just, you know, we grow up in this society as women where so much is based on looks, and I still have to check myself all the time of like, you know, weight distribution, whatever. Like I really don't care in the ways I used to, but it's still like a background layer. And I would be with these Italian women, and they just walked through the world so much differently. They were just happy and full, and there really wasn't any body image that like were, you know, like they didn't have the same shit, for a lack of better word, like in their head. And that, seeing that, and also just being immersed in a culture that was centered around families and centered around well-being and centered around like joy every day, like just changed so much of my perspective of the world. And I realized that like I wanted to learn how to be in my body, and I wanted to be in wellness, and I wanted to like not go back to my job at the law firm. And yeah, it really changed me because I was able to see a lot of Italy, and it was the first time in my life I was ever alone, and didn't, you know, speak the language, and had to sort, you know, my community out and everything out. And yeah, it was really transformative, and it kind of pushed me into this career of wellness. And I saw that Lululemon was hiring in San Diego when I was coming back. And I was like, I will go do that. Forget the law firm job. And yeah, it woke me up to a different experience of like, we grow up and we see what's in front of us and what's modeled to us, whether it's like, you know, stay at home mom, that's what you see, that's what you do. And then you go have this massive cultural experience and you realize there's so much more. then I don't think I really realized that there was a different career path or a different life path for me until I lived there and saw just a more joyous life.
So great. Did you learn Italian while you were there? Did you end up learning some of the language?
Po, not really. When someone speaks, I know what they're saying, and I can kind of like, I can, it's interesting because it's very much based on like a Spanish dialect. So I'll speak a combination of Spanish and Italian to someone.
Mhm.
But I really want to go back and really immerse myself and learn it because it is actually a really, really beautiful language.
Yeah, it is. I've
But
been
yeah.
learning little bits of Italian. I'm going to go over there in December to go rock climbing. And so
Oh,
I saw that. I
cool.
was like, I have to ask her about Italy just because I'm curious. And
Oh,
I really love what you said because
cool.
I love the idea of just spending a large amount of time outside of the influence of US culture and to really get a better look at like all of the subtle ways that we're influenced, as women, just as humans, because I think it is so vastly different in other cultures and other parts of the world.
These women, I think if anything, I've been on like a journey of like understanding my own embodiment and also teaching women, whoever, to also occupy their bodies. They just
Hmm.
are that. They
Mm.
just were that. And so it was the first time in my life I was really modeled that. And even like playing softball at UCLA, like I played with Olympians who were gold medalists. Like they didn't occupy their bodies in the way these women did. They did on the field, but off the field, it was just different. So
Hmm.
it had a really profound impact on my life.
I'm glad you went. It's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. What part of Italy are you going to?
Um, it's TBD, but I think we were going to go to Sicily for climbing, but it's a little hard to get to. So I think Salerno, there's some good spots, and Positano, a little bit
Very
north and south
cool.
of Napoli. And I've been to parts of the Amalfi Coast, but not for climbing. So this will be a whole different ball game to try to figure out.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Enjoy every moment of it.
Hey, so I'm excited. I'm gonna bring like my little recorder and just meet interesting people and be like, come on the podcast.
Totally.
You know?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
fun. So we can switch gears just a little bit.
Sure.
I Are you still doing the journals? Because they're such that's how I first found out about your work. So I'd love to hear more about them,
Yeah.
the Play Everyday journals.
Yeah. So we started a publishing company and back in 2021. And so we did 5 journals, and we've paused for now just because um, both like my business partners and I just realized like our work in the world was becoming emergent and it was difficult to keep up. But yeah, we that's been a really wonderful, interesting journey just to be able to like have stories from different humans and just like follow like the body through movement and healing and grief. And what was really interesting is every journal we created, it's like we embodied the lessons of it. So we did a whole
Mm.
issue around like grief and repair. And it's like we went through the underworld, like we will never do that one again. Let's do love on the next one. But yeah, getting into publishing was a really cool, really wonderful experience. But we ultimately decided that we all wanted to like be back in the world with like working with our hands. And I think it'll probably come back. And I can see what I want to do with my work with female athletes is actually like publish like handbooks and like textbooks. And so I can see a lot of that work like coming into form
Mm.
as a publisher, like through that realm of having a little more. Because what we tried to do with Play Every Day and Source Journal was to tell like different, all range of like human stories and then couple it with movement. And then now I want it to be like a little bit more of like, this is a specific guidebook for like the female athlete body. And here's what a movement anatomy looks like. And here's what cycle mapping looks like. And here's what nervous system emotional regulation looks like. So that's kind of where that piece of my career is going. But yeah, it's been a really wonderful journey having captured so many human stories. And yeah, I just see it more now going into like more educational, more specific, and less all of humanity.
That makes sense. And I mean, that's so needed too, I'm sure, to that way it's, that one to many model through publishing and having guidebooks like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the play everyday journals that are out there, I would advise everyone to go take a look on Whitney's site. It'll be linked in the show notes because they're beautiful, beautiful books.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, it's really just it is lovely to sort of take a walk through someone's experience, and the photos are so beautiful, and it's just very well done. So
Thank you. Yeah, they're very much evergreen. Like the stories that are in each issue, they really they're timeless. And so it's not, it doesn't matter what season of life you're in. They're all like pretty profound. And we tried really hard to make it like a very photocentric, but also like the stories and the humans that we were interviewing, we just wanted the photos to really like mirror the level of wisdom that we were getting from each human. So thank you. Yeah, they're really wonderful. I'm super, super proud of them.
yeah, they are. It's yeah. So take a look. There's a few that are still available. I know
Hmm.
some are sold out, but there's still some. So I would definitely
Yeah.
go take a look. And then anything as a middle-aged woman who's quite active and athletic, I am wondering if you can give us like any tips that you find particularly helpful for a lot of my audience is also middle-aged women or
Yeah.
women that are, out of college. But as we do get older and as our bodies change, and this is something I've been writing and speaking about a lot more too, is really being able to work with like this phase, like as we're in our 30s and our 40s and we're noticing
Mm-hmm.
things are different and we need to support our health and our athleticism a little different. Any sort of carryover that you found to be, and I'm sure there's probably more than one thing, but anything that you found to be particularly helpful that um, would be beneficial to older women who want to do
Yeah.
nervous system regulation and stay athletic and active and
I think total body mobility is really underlooked. And so on a daily basis, like I've really created a very like intuitive movement practice for myself. And I love trying to invite women into doing the same. And so we hosted like a few immersions and like deeper dives where we went with women for like 6 weeks and just taught them the process of like going from the ground up and really like actually like I would show you in stand up, but like smashing your toes and like rolling your own ankles and doing that on the ground and standing on top of them and opening up your hands because what we found was like so much of like injuries not only in athletes but as like we get older, like if there's something, I have this like massive bunion on my foot from wearing cleats my whole life, and so I have to work really hard at like smashing my toes and creating foot mobility, otherwise I will have knee pain. And so I think just working with your feet and hands and loosening that up is like a really important overlooked step. And then the other thing that I think is really powerful is teaching all humans like single leg glute activation and like getting really good at like being on one leg and then being on the other and like going really slow, like just going all the way down to the ground and all the way back up on a single leg, and then just becoming way more lateral in the ways in which we move. But yeah, just going from the ground up, like stretching your feet, smashing your toes. I love teaching women like self touch and like finding the lines of their body. Um, but yeah, they one of the things my business partner on the journal and also the movement practices, Jen Richardson, and I always talk about is like we do yoga in this little rectangle, but our world isn't a rectangle. Like we have to move so much more laterally. And so I like to teach people to not only like rebound and shake and move energy, but also just like turn on a song and dance and move and like add fluidity. But yeah, the single leg glute activation, like teaching that to someone um, on top of like the hand mobility, the foot mobility, I think is really life changing, especially as we get older, and also just a lot of hip movement. Like I think we need to
Mhm.
do like a class for like the follow up. We can do like
Yeah.
a whole embodiment practice. But like
Yeah.
I teach all women this, just like hip movement
Mhm.
and moving like a serpent for whatever reason just really helps move energy and synovial
Yes.
fluid. But I know that was a lot, but I hope that's a little bit helpful.
No, it was great. I think you're really speaking, to my heart as a PT, and also I'm a belly dancer, and
Oh, rad.
so much of that like circular and serpentine movement and taking up lateral space and just like working with your spine. And I feel like it's so inherent to us, particularly as women. I feel like these are
Mhm.
movements we've been doing really since the dawn of time. And
Mhm.
so like the fact that we don't do them as much. And I do this even with like, I'll work with, people in their 80s and 90s, and I'm having everyone do some hip circles and, oh, what do you notice? How is that for you? And at least touch into it a little bit. Yeah. And I love single leg glute posterior chain activation. I did a bunch of that recently in training for a backpacking trip. So
Mm.
I'm like, I don't want my knees to hurt the way they usually do.
Exactly.
It was money. It helped so much.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you said that. In lateral movement, exactly. Like our
Mhm.
world isn't just linear. So how do we have fun and play and take up space and all of the space around us? I loved everything you said. It really does make me want to move. So I
Yeah.
have been moving.
And I also think that we have this, idea that you need to be either in a gym or a fitness class and it takes an hour, but it really doesn't. Like some days I'll move for 5, 10 minutes because my practice is so sacred and inherent to me. Like I have to move every day. But even today, like I woke up with anxiety because there's been a lot of changes and grief and things in my life that I've been processing. And so I just did like a full I just moved and shaked and stomped and made noise. And it probably was like 11 minutes, if that. And I felt, the anxiety was gone. It goes, it moves. But it's just giving yourself 5 to 10 minutes to actually listen to your body and then move accordingly. That's why I really like the serpentine motions, because if you're like moving from the ground up as a serpentine, you will find the places in your body that are cranky, and you'll be able to like alchemize that or work with that.
Yeah.
But it just
Yeah.
takes a little bit. It's not like calories in, calories out. You got to make a deficit.
Mhm.
That's I'm so sick of that. It's like
Yeah. It's just move your
move,
body.
just move intuitively in a way that brings you joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Joyful movement. I'm a big proponent of this. And I love what you said too. It doesn't need to take a long time. It really doesn't. And it's such a rapid state changer. Even if we don't go into it with the idea of wanting to change our state, it inevitably will.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and just walking has been whenever I am in a tough space in my life, walking just that bilateral long, movement patterns is super, super, super helpful. And I'm like the weirdo walking down Sunset Cliffs where I'll just like be moving my hands and I don't really care anymore. I care a lot less. But I have 3 kids and this is the time in which I'm gonna move. So I'm gonna find, the spaces
Hmm.
that I feel cranky and move that energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't have to take a lot. It really doesn't.
No, it's great. Yeah. And it's not about calories in and calories out. It's really just, and the intuitive piece too, to move. And I think that even just learning how to do that or even cultivating awareness that we can do that, I think can be a really
Hmm.
big deal for people. Like, just how does your
Yeah.
body want to move?
Hmm.
What if we just start with one arm or one hand? What happens? Like, if you
Hmm.
listen, how does it want to move? I feel like that can really help with the sovereignty piece as well. Like, oh, this
It
is my
it really
body.
does. Even if you just give like a framework, like when I teach girls or take them through like a 4-week course, like we'll start with like this is the movement framework we're gonna go through every day. So it's gonna start with some sort of grounding. We're gonna like find our feet in the ground, and then we're gonna find like mobility in our feet, and then we're gonna just like work up the chain. So when you're at home and you are doing this on your own, start in your feet, start connecting with the ground, like smash your toes, like open your feet, and then start like moving up the chain, whether that's like pounding your legs and bringing in blood flow, and then getting into your hips and getting into your spine and then getting into your shoulders and neck. Like I'm just teaching them like go from the ground up to move, and you will find the places that actually need to be released or need a little more time. And I try to teach like one simple movement pattern that kind of like layers onto itself. But yeah, teaching from the ground up, a really profound yoga teacher taught me that years and years and years ago. And it actually is very helpful because it gives someone a place to start. It's like
Hmm.
start at your feet, move up, and like don't ignore the knees, don't ignore the thighs.
Hmm.
And it's just, but it is, and people like to be led and they want to feel um, I think, you and I keep using this word sovereignty, but it really is, I think the somatic experiencing piece that you do and the work that I do in movement and trying to to just cultivate an awareness of a nervous system. Like it is sovereignty at the end of the day, because then you can go move into the world and you don't need permission, or you don't need someone else to like teach you and show you. But we've been so afraid of like creating an injury or creating whatever. But the body is way more intelligent. Like it knows how to birth, it knows how to die, it knows how to move. You just have to get out of the way sometimes. And it's also really nice to be led by someone.
Yeah, sometimes it's great. It's
Mm-hmm.
nice to be able to do both. It's nice to not have to be led every time that you move.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Whitney, for being
Yeah,
here.
my pleasure.
Yeah, it
This is
was great to
wonderful.
yeah, it was great to hear more about what you do. And everyone, please check out Whitney's website. And there's some information for her Instagram, and everything is linked in the show notes. And then I like to end on the tagline for this podcast is come home to your body. And I know we've talked a
Mm.
lot about sovereignty and coming home, but maybe if you could just speak briefly to what that means for you, what came up in the resonance, even as I said that for you. Yeah.
Mm. Um, I'm just like looking out the window right now, kind of like orienting, and it's just like the leaves are beautiful and green. I think, um, and I say that because I don't think that my body has always been a safe space for me to come home to, and I know
Yeah.
that um, I kind of had this like cut off from the neck down mentality of like, okay, whatever's happening in my body, a doctor is going to tell me. Like I had um, a time in which I had a doctor just like very nonchalantly tell me like, you're not going to have children on your own. We're going to have to do in vitro, this, that, and the other. We're going to get you on drugs right away. And it was just
Nice.
like, so yeah, matter of fact. And also just like, it was like she was saying, it's Tuesday. It's going to be all right, but it's Tuesday. And coming home to my body was um, really realizing that I could work with the different energies that I was having, that like I wasn't absorbed and just defined by the pain that I was having emotionally and physically. And yeah, I've had some really intense moments in my life with like anxiety and depression, and what I've learned through that process and working with like somatic experiences, that like we can alchemize like whatever is there, we can integrate it. And so coming home to my body has allowed for that. And it's also, I think, really given me my life's purpose of working with other women and working with young female athletes. And I just want to give people permission to be in their bodies and to like know that it's safe and know that they have more sovereignty than what maybe a doctor will tell them, or what they're hearing from a partner or whatever. Like the body just doesn't lie. Like it might create a charge that's like some sort of like unintegrated experience, but it's teaching, and it's you can utilize pain as a map, and you can also move it if you don't constantly over identify with it. So yeah, long story long, like I
Mm,
think coming home to your body is in a lot of ways coming home to God, if
mm.
source, whatever you want to call it. It's coming home to like the love of yourself and this like one vessel we're given in this lifetime to have a soul's experience.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Beautiful question.
I- Thanks.
It really got me. I think you saw me. I was like, oh, that's deep.
I almost didn't ask it, but it seemed like it was in the
I'm
resonance.
glad you did. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
sacred. The body is so sacred.
indeed. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.